Hello, friends. We are interested in the geography of our views, so please like and write in the comments from which city are you watching us, and were there loud stories of betrayal in your city? Share your stories with us. Maybe the next betrayal story will be from your city. And we start. The air smelled like rain as Marcus climbed out of his truck, boots crunching on the gravel of the driveway. The sky hung low, gray and heavy, as if pressing down on the suburb of Willow Creek. His modest ranch-style home sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, beige siding blending into the dusk. The kind of place where nothing ever seems to happen until you look closely. He adjusted the strap of his battered bag, stuffed with ungraded essays from Introduction to American History, and exhaled slowly. Another day is over. Inside, the house was greeted with warmth and a faint aroma of roasted garlic and rosemary. Rachel's work, no doubt. She always cooked when she wanted to ground the evening, to create the illusion that everything was in its place. Marcus kicked off his boots at the door, trying not to leave any dirt on the wooden floor. The living room was immersed in twilight, illuminated only by the soft light of a table lamp. The TV was murmured in the background, some news anchor droned on about markets or politics or whatever else filled the void. "Ratch," he called, throwing his bag on the kitchen counter. "Here," she responded, her voice clear and polished from the kitchen. He followed the sound, loosening his tie. Rachel stood at the stove, stirring the risotto with a wooden spoon. Her dark hair is pulled back into a neat bun, and she's wearing a tailored blazer over jeans, a look that screams she's just out of the office, but still playing the role of lady of the house. She glanced over her shoulder, a smile flashing quickly, rehearsed. "You're late," she said, not accusing, just stating. "Traffic jams." "Checking the work," Marcus lied, although he didn't understand why. He stayed late helping a student with an essay, but admitting it seemed unnecessary. "It smells delicious. Just risotto. Nothing special." She returned to the stove. Her movements were clear and precise. "Caleb is upstairs. I said dinner was in 10 minutes. Marcus nodded, although she wasn't looking. He went to the refrigerator and took out a beer. The cold bottle felt pleasant in my hand and calmed me down. He leaned against the counter, watching her. There was a rhythm to her actions, a kind of control. Rachel always had it control. That's what made her so good at her job, doing PR for a tech company downtown. She could weave a story out of nothing, make her believe that the world was exactly the way she wanted it to be. "How is the day?" he asked, opening the bottle. She didn't answer right away. The spoon scraped gently against the bottom of the pan, the sound subtle but intentional. "It's okay," she finally said. Tense. "You know how it goes. Meetings, letters, the usual chaos. Anything interesting?" Her laugh was short, almost harsh. "Interesting? No. Just work." She put down her spoon and reached for a bottle of white wine, splashing some into the risotto. "And you? How is academic life there?" He shrugged, taking a sip of his beer. "As usual. Students don't read assignments, but there are plenty of opinions. Sometimes the arguments are heated." She smiled again, but her eyes remained cold. "You're good at this. You make them talk." He didn't understand whether this was a compliment or an evasion. Before he could answer, the stairs creaked and Caleb appeared at the door. At 11, their son was all angles, long limbs, sharp cheekbones, eyes that seemed to carry too heavy a load for a teenager. Hooded sweatshirt, headphones hanging around my neck like a noose. "Hi, son," Marcus said, straightening up. "How are you?" Caleb didn't look at him. He walked to the refrigerator, grabbed a can of soda, and froze, as if deciding whether to stay. "Norm," he muttered, his voice low and lifeless. "Is it normal?" Marcus asked, trying to sound light. "Is this all I get?" Caleb shrugged, without looking up. "Don't know. Just, okay." Rachel turned around, wiping her hands on a towel. "Caleb, sit down. Dinner is almost ready. And put away your headphones, please." He rolled his eyes but obeyed, throwing his headphones on the counter. He sat down at the table, looking at his phone. Marcus looked at him, feeling something heavy and vague stirring in his chest. Caleb had always been quiet, But lately this silence had become different, dense, almost tangible, like a wall. "How was school?" Marcus asked, sitting down opposite. Norm, the same answer again, as if it had been learned by heart. "You already said that," Marcus noted, trying to smile. "Maybe some details?" Caleb looked up, just for a second, and something flashed in his eyes: irritation, fatigue, or maybe something deeper. "Nothing special. Lessons, tests. Everything is as always." Rachel placed plates of risotto in front of them, a fragrant cloud of steam rising from the table. "Let's eat before it gets cold," she said, sitting down. Her voice was warm, but it carried the same polish as everything else. "Caleb, tell your dad about the biology project." "You did it, right?" Caleb picked at his food with his fork. "Nothing like that. Just a report. I passed it, and that's it." Marcus looked at Rachel, searching her face for a clue, a hint that she knew more than she was saying. But she only picked up a piece of risotto. Her movements were smooth, almost theatrical. "He's being modest," she said, smiling. "The teacher praised him. She said he had a talent for science. Is it true?" Marcus turned to Caleb, hoping to catch on to something. "This is cool, son. What kind of project?" Caleb sighed, as if the question was too much to bear. "About ecosystems. Nothing interesting." "Ecosystems are important," Marcus said, trying not to press. "Everything is interconnected, you know, like a family." He immediately regretted the last phrase. She hung in the air, ridiculous, too heavy for dinner. Caleb looked down at his plate. Rachel froze with her fork in her hand, her smile becoming a little more intense. "Well," she said, quickly filling the silence, "the main thing is that I passed." "And the grades are good, right?" "Yeah," Caleb muttered. Marcus took a sip of his beer, feeling the conversation slipping away. He wanted to ask more, to get at least something out of his son, but words seemed useless. He looked at Rachel instead. She ate carefully, as if every bite was part of a ritual. Her phone was lying nearby, the screen was dark, but Marcus noticed how she glanced at him once or twice, as if she was waiting for something. "Are you okay at work?" he asked, changing the subject. "I thought you were talking about some new project." She nodded without looking up. "Yes, a campaign for a client. Product launch. Nothing I couldn't handle." "You always manage," he said, and it was sincere. Rachel was a machine when it came to work. But something in her tone, the way she avoided his gaze, made him freeze. "I'm trying," she answered, and her smile was almost real. Almost. The rest of the dinner passed in silence, broken only by the clinking of forks and occasional phrases. Caleb finished eating the fastest, muttered something about his homework, and went upstairs. His steps up the stairs sounded like a sentence. Marcus watched him leave, feeling a lump forming in his throat. Once upon a time, Caleb was different, open, talkative, with eyes full of curiosity. Now he was like a shadow slipping away in the darkness. Rachel began clearing away the plates, her movements as precise as ever. Marcus stood up to help, but she waved her hand. "I can handle it," she said. "Go rest. You're on your feet all day." "I'm fine," he answered, but still went to the sink, turning on the water. "Caleb, he's been a little different lately. Didn't you notice anything?" She froze, holding the plate. "He's a teenager, Marcus. They're all like that. Phase." "Maybe," he said, but didn't believe it. "It's just, he doesn't even look at us. It's like, I don't know, it's like he's somewhere else." Rachel put the plate in the dishwasher, her face unreadable. "He's fine, just gives us space, or yourself." "Space?" Marcus frowned. "He is our son, not a neighbor." She turned to him, her eyes met his, and for a moment he saw something in them, a shadow of fatigue, maybe irritation. But she quickly turned away, wiping her hands with a towel. "Don't push it," she said, and her voice was softer than he expected. "He can handle it. We can handle everything." Marcus wanted to object, but the words stuck. Instead, he nodded, feeling the kitchen become more crowded, as if the walls were slowly closing in. He finished his beer, the bottle clinking as he tossed it into the trash. "I'll go check the work," he said, although he knew that he would not do this. Okay, Rachel replied, already busy with something else. He went up to his office, a small corner on the second floor littered with books and old army souvenirs. He closed the door, sat down at the table, and stared at the blank laptop screen. The silence of the house was enveloping, but it did not reassure me. She was heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. Somewhere deep down, he knew something was wrong. Not with Caleb, not with Rachel, not with himself, but with everything at once. But he couldn't name it. I couldn't yet. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. In the distance, outside the window, it began to rain. The house was asleep, but not Marcus. He lay in the darkness of the bedroom, listening to Rachel breathing next to him, evenly, too evenly, as if even in her sleep she controlled herself. Caleb was in his room, behind a closed door, and Marcus imagined him sitting in front of the screen, his head in his headphones, cut off from the world. Something in this picture, in this house, in this silence, scratched him from the inside, like a shard of glass. He turned on his side, looking at Rachel's silhouette. Her face, softened by the darkness, seemed almost unfamiliar. He had known her for so long, but at this moment she was a stranger. It was as if an invisible wall had grown between them, and he didn't know when it started. Maybe months ago, maybe years. He closed his eyes, trying to push the thoughts away. But the silence of the house did not give peace. She whispered that everything is not as simple as it seems. And Marcus, a former military man accustomed to trusting his instincts, knew that the whisper was right. The next morning the rain did not stop. He drummed on the roof while Marcus drank coffee, standing at the kitchen window. Rachel left early, something about a meeting with a client. Caleb came down, grabbed some toast, and disappeared, muttering that he was late for the bus. The house was empty again, and Marcus was left alone, with a mug in his hands and the feeling that something was slipping away. He put the mug in the sink and looked at the phone. Message from Rachel. "I'll be late. Don't wait." Short, as always. He wrote back, "Okay," but didn't send it. Instead, he walked upstairs, stopping at Caleb's door. Closed as usual. He knocked, knowing no one would answer. Silence. Marcus returned to his office and sat down at his desk. The essay was awaiting revision, but he couldn't concentrate. Instead, he opened his desk drawer and pulled out an old army dog tag. The metal was cold, familiar. He turned it over in his fingers, remembering the days when everything was simpler or at least clearer. War teaches clarity, enemy, ally, target. But here, in this quiet house, he didn't know what he was dealing with. He removed the token and closed the drawer. The rain got heavier, and somewhere in the depths of the house, something creaked old beams, probably. But Marcus tensed, listening. Nothing. Only rain. The morning in the classroom smelled of chalk and old wood. Marcus stood at the board, marker in hand, as his voice, low and measured, carried through the room. 20-odd students, glued to their laptops or phones, were barely listening. He talked about the Punic Wars, about Hannibal and the betrayal of Carthage, but his thoughts were somewhere far away. Last night, Caleb going to his room, Rachel with her polished smile, all this settled in her chest like dust. "Betrayal," he said, looking around the audience. "This is not just a personal choice. This is a break in the system. Trust, union, family." He paused, hoping that at least someone would look up. When Hannibal turned against Rome, he didn't just break his oath. He destroyed the order that held the world. A girl in the front row, with bright pink headphones, wrote something down. The others were silent. Marcus suppressed a sigh. He loved teaching, loved history, its clarity, its lessons. But today the words seemed empty, as if he was reading someone else's text. Irritation, incomprehensible and sticky, accumulated somewhere under the ribs. He didn't sleep much, replaying last night's dinner in his head, Caleb's silence, Rachel's look when she checked her phone. Something was wrong, and he hated himself for not being able to name it. "Okay," he said, throwing the marker on the table. "Let's discuss. Why did Hannibal do what he did? What pushes a person to betray?" Silence. Then a guy in the back row, wearing a baseball cap, lazily raised his hand. "Money," he said, asking more than asserting. Marcus nodded, hiding his irritation. Money is the motive, but not always the main one. More, the girl with the headphones raised her hand. Revenge, or the feeling of being the first to be betrayed. Exactly, Marcus said, and his voice wavered. He turned to the board as if writing something down, but simply looked at the white surface. Betrayed first. The words touched something inside, like a stone thrown into dark water. He continued the lesson, but his thoughts were confused. Caleb, Rachel. This house seemed too quiet, too right. He knew what a lie looked like. His years in the army had taught him to read people, to notice the cracks in their masks. But at home he was blind. When the bell rang, interrupted his thoughts, the students began to gather, noisily moving their chairs. Marcus sat down at his desk, opening his laptop to check his email. His phone, lying next to him, blinked. New message. He took it, expecting to see a reminder from Rachel or spam. But the number was unfamiliar. Short text without signature. Is he really yours? Marcus froze. My heart beat in my chest, sharply, like a shot. He reread the message as if the words might have changed. Local number, but no name in contacts. He pressed call, but the call was immediately dropped. The answering machine didn't even turn on. He wrote in response, "Who is this?" Sent. Silence. He put the phone down, feeling his palms grow cold. It could have been a mistake. Joke. One of the students who decided to make fun. But the words, "Is he really yours?" clung to the mind like a rusty hook. Caleb, someone else, and why now? He got up and went to the window. The campus spreads out behind the glass neat lawns, students rushing to lectures, a gray sky promising rain. Everything looked normal. But something shifted inside Marcus, as if the ground under his feet began to crumble. Mr. Davis. A voice behind him made him turn around. A girl with headphones stood at the door, holding a tablet. "Can I ask a question about the essay?" He nodded, forcing himself to smile. "Of course, Emily. What's there?" She started talking about the structure of the essay, but Marcus barely listened. His gaze kept returning to the phone lying on the table. The message burned in my memory like a warning. He answered Emily automatically, advised her about the thesis, and sent her off to get ready. When she left, he picked up the phone again. No answer, only the same words, cold and sharp. He left the classroom, heading towards his office. The corridors were buzzing students, teachers, laughter, snatches of conversation. But Marcus felt cut off, as if he was walking underwater. He closed the office door, sat down at the table, and stared at the phone. I should have called Rachel. Tell. Or not. What if it doesn't mean anything? What if he's screwing himself over? He opened his laptop, trying to distract himself. A folder of essays that need to be reviewed. To-do list. But the fingers themselves reached for the phone and opened the message. Is he really yours? He pictured Caleb, his angular face, his dark eyes, so similar to Rachel's. Or not. He never thought about it. Never doubted it. But now, the irritation that had been building all day flared up. He hated this feeling helplessness, uncertainty. In the army, everything was clear. The enemy, the goal, the action. Here, he didn't know what he was fighting against. With a shadow, with your own paranoia, he clenched his fists, feeling his nails dig into his palms. The office door creaked, and he flinched. Tom, a colleague from the department, entered with the usual mug of coffee in his hand. "Marcus, how are you?" Tom plopped down in the chair opposite. "You look like you've been run over by a truck." "I just didn't get enough sleep," Marcus answered, putting the phone in his pocket. "The lesson was long." Tom chuckled. "I know this feeling. These kids will get everything out of you. Listen, are you going to the department meeting tomorrow? They will discuss the budget, as always, mortal boredom." "Yeah, I guess," Marcus said, although he wasn't listening. His thoughts were elsewhere. "Tom, have you ever received strange messages?" "Well, anonymous?" Tom raised an eyebrow. "Anonymous? Like threats? Or what?" "Not threats, just weird, no signature." Tom shrugged. "Happens. The students are playing around. Or spam. Forget it, Marcus. Don't waste your nerves. Yeah, Marcus nodded, but Tom's words didn't help. He felt his irritation growing into something more anxiety, sharp and cold. Tom left, leaving Marcus alone. He took out his phone again and opened the message. His fingers hovered over the screen, but he didn't know what to write. Instead, he blocked the number. It didn't solve anything, but it gave the illusion of control. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. I had to concentrate. In class, on the essay, anything but this. But the words wouldn't let go. Is he really yours? In the evening, the rain began again, pounding on the roof of the campus. Marcus finished his last lesson, packed his things, and went out to the car. The phone was silent, no answer to his message, no new texts. Rachel wrote this morning briefly, "I'll be late, client dinner. Kisses." He didn't answer. I didn't know what to say. The house was empty. Caleb, apparently, has not yet returned from school or has already gone to his room. Marcus dropped his bag at the door and walked into the kitchen. There is a note from Rachel on the table. Food in the fridge, heated up. Love it. He opened the refrigerator and took out a container of leftover risotto. I put it in the microwave, but I didn't want to eat it. He sat down at the table, looking out the window. The rain poured down the street lights reflected in the puddles like blurry stars. He took out his phone and opened the message. Is he really yours? The words seemed alive, as if they were whispering to him. He imagined Caleb, his silence, his detachment. The teenage phase, as Rachel said, or something more. The door slammed and Marcus flinched. Caleb walked in, wet, hood over his head. Hi, Marcus said, standing up. Where have you been? It's raining. Caleb threw off his backpack without looking at it. In the library, he muttered. Homework. Library? Marcus frowned. Caleb never went to the library. Are you okay? Yes. Caleb was already heading towards the stairs. I'm just tired. Wait, Marcus said, his voice sounding harsher than he intended. Sit down. Let's talk. Caleb froze and turned slowly. His eyes were dark, unreadable. About what? Don't know. About you. About the school. About whatever. Marcus felt his words getting stuck. You've been like a ghost all month. What's happening? Caleb shrugged. Nothing. Just business. Business, Marcus repeated, and irritation flared up again. What's up, Caleb? You don't even look at us. On me. To Mom. What's wrong? Caleb looked down, his fingers tightening on the strap of his backpack. It's okay, Dad. I don't know. Tired. I'm tired, Marcus said, his voice shaking. From what? From us. Caleb looked at him, and something flashed in his eyes, pain, fear, or maybe guilt. But he didn't say anything. He simply turned and went upstairs. His footsteps echoed in the silence. The rain did not stop for the third day, and the house seemed damp, despite the heating being on. Marcus returned from work later than usual. He stayed on campus, sorting out his essay, although, to be honest, he just didn't want to go home. The message from the unfamiliar number still burned in my memory. Is he really yours? He didn't tell Rachel. I didn't know how to start. And what can I say? Why does he feel sick from words that could be someone's stupid joke? He dropped his bag by the door, shaking the drops off his jacket. The living room was quiet, except for the ticking of the wall clock, a heavy gift from Rachel's mother, with a bronze pendulum. The sound of them always irritated him, but Rachel insisted it added character to the house. Marcus walked into the kitchen, expecting to find a note or leftovers from dinner, but the table was empty. No note, no Rachel. Only the smell is faint, but alien. Something sharp, with notes of sandalwood and citrus. Cologne, not him. He froze, listening. The house was silent, but the smell was there, in the air, like an uninvited guest. Marcus walked upstairs, his steps echoing loudly in the silence. The bedroom door was ajar, light from the bedside lamp spilling onto the floor. Rachel sat cross-legged on the bed with her laptop in her lap. Her hair was down, and she looked softer than usual, almost vulnerable. You're late, she said without looking up. Everything is fine? Yes, he answered, entering. The smell became stronger, enveloping like smoke. He stopped at the chest of drawers, looking at her. You came back early. The client canceled the meeting. She closed the laptop and stretched. I decided to work at home. Marcus nodded, but his gaze flickered around the room. Everything is in place. Their bed, neatly made, her shoes by the closet, his book on the nightstand. But the smell, he couldn't ignore it. What kind of perfume? He asked, trying to sound casual. Rachel raised an eyebrow, her lips twitching into a smile. Perfume? Which? It smells like cologne. He looked at her, waiting for a reaction. Not mine. She laughed lightly, almost sincerely. Oh, it's probably in the store. I went into a shopping center and someone spilled perfume there. I almost choked. She shrugged, putting down her laptop. Are you hungry? I can heat something up. No, he said, but did not move. Her answer was too quick, too smooth. As always, Rachel had a way of speaking in a way that made you believe even if you didn't want to. But the smell was here in their bedroom, and it did not dissolve. Are you okay? She asked, tilting her head. Her eyes were attentive, but there was a shadow flickering in them, fatigue or maybe something else. I'm just tired, he answered, turning away. He didn't want to look at her. Not now. Is Caleb home? Upstairs. She stood up and reached for the phone. He said he was drawing. Didn't touch him. Draws. Marcus frowned. Caleb hasn't picked up pencils since elementary school. What is he drawing? Don't know. Rachel shrugged. Her voice was light, but her fingers tightened around the phone. Teenagers, Marcus. They have their own worlds. He nodded, but something in her tone, the way she quickly changed the subject, made him freeze. He walked out of the bedroom, feeling the scent of cologne clinging to him like a spider's web. Caleb's door was closed, as always. Marcus knocked, not expecting an answer. Caleb, can I? Silence. Then there was a rustling sound, and the door opened slightly. Caleb stood in the doorway, wearing an old t-shirt, with paint stains on his hands. His eyes were dark and wary. What? He asked without moving. Mom said you draw, Marcus said, trying to sound friendly. I want to see it. Caleb hesitated, then stepped back to let him pass. The room was chaotic. Textbooks scattered, headphones on the floor, the bed unmade. On the table by the window lay a sheet of paper, thickly shaded with black paint. Marcus moved closer, feeling Caleb watching him intently. The drawing was strange. A man, or what was supposed to be a man. Tall, in a long coat, but without a face. Instead of eyes, nose, mouth emptiness, black, as if someone had carved out his features. The lines were sharp, almost violent, and the paint was smeared in places, as if Caleb was angry when he painted. Who is this? Marcus asked, trying not to show his anxiety. Caleb shrugged, crossing his arms. Nobody. Just like that. Just like that, Marcus turned to him. It looks gloomy. It's just a drawing, Dad, Caleb said, his voice sharper than usual. There is no need to look for meaning. Marcus wanted to object, but stopped. He looked at his son, at his clenched fists, at the shadow in his eyes. Something was wrong. Not just teenage blues. It was deeper, darker. Are you okay? He asked quietly. If something is wrong, you can tell. Caleb looked away, his fingers fiddling with the hem of his t-shirt. It's okay, he muttered. I don't know. Leave me alone, okay? Marcus nodded, although everything inside was screaming not to leave. He left, closing the door behind him. In the corridor, he froze, listening. Silence. Only the clock below ticked, like the pulse of the house. He went down to the living room, feeling the smell of cologne still hovering somewhere nearby, although maybe that was just his paranoia. Rachel sat on the couch, glass of wine in hand, scrolling through something on her phone. She looked up as he entered. Well, she asked, did you talk to him? If you can call it a conversation, Marcus said, sitting down opposite him. He draws strange things. A man without a face. Rachel frowned, but her face quickly smoothed out. They're just teenagers, Marcus. They all go through it. Do you remember how I wrote dark poems at 16? My mother almost sent me to a psychotherapist. This isn't poetry, Ratch, he said, his voice firmer than he expected. I don't know. This doesn't look like him. She put the glass down and looked at him carefully. You think too much. He's fine. It just gives vent to emotions. Emotions. Marcus felt his irritation flare up again. What are his emotions, Rachel? You know, because I'm not. She fell silent, her fingers gripping the phone a little tighter. Then she smiled the same polished smile that always disarmed him. He is our son, Marcus. We know him better than anyone. Give him time. He wanted to answer, but the word stuck. Instead, he got up, went into the kitchen, and poured water. The smell of cologne was still in your head, or was it in the air? He couldn't understand. Rachel remained in the living room, her silhouette reflected in the glass of the window. She looked calm, but Marcus knew her too well. This stillness, this control, she always did this when she was hiding something. He didn't sleep that night. He lay there, looking at the ceiling, while Rachel breathed next to him evenly, too evenly. The smell of cologne had faded, but its shadow remained, like a stain that could not be washed off. He thought about Caleb, about the drawing. A man without a face. Why no face? What does it mean? And why doesn't Caleb want to talk? He stood up, quietly so as not to wake Rachel, and went downstairs. The living room was dark. Only the light of a lantern from the street came through the curtains. He walked over to the table where Rachel's phone lay. He never checked her phone. I never thought I would have to. But the message is he really yours? And this smell. He took the phone. The screen lit up. Code. He knew it Caleb's birthday. The fingers froze. He couldn't. Shouldn't. He put the phone back, feeling his heart pounding. It was crazy. He trusted her. Trusted. But then why did everything inside scream that he was blind? Returning to the bedroom, he lay down, but sleep did not come. Instead, he saw a drawing of Caleb, black lines, a blank face, and I heard Rachel say, just teenagers. But it wasn't easy. Nothing in this house was simple. In the morning, Caleb left for school without saying a word. Rachel sipped her coffee while scrolling through her tablet, her face flawless as always. Marcus looked at her, trying to find a crack, a hint. But she was Rachel perfect, collected, impenetrable. Are you late today? He asked, just to break the silence. Maybe, she answered without looking up. New client. We need to make an impression. I see, he said, his voice empty. He stood up and took the keys. See you in the evening. She nodded and smiled. But her eyes did not follow him as he left. The rain weakened, turning into a fine drizzle that covered everything with a thin, damp film. Marcus was driving to Caleb's school to pick him up after practice. Rachel had warned him that morning that she had a schedule conflict. Her voice on the phone was as always collected, businesslike, but with a slight shadow of fatigue, which he noticed more and more often. He didn't ask what kind of pad it was. I didn't want to hear another, everything's fine, just work. He already knew it was a lie, or at least he felt it. The school parking lot was almost empty. Only a few cars gleamed under the streetlights, their bodies reflecting the dim light. Marcus parked at the far end, turned off the engine, and looked at his watch. Caleb was due out in about 10 minutes. He leaned back in his seat, trying to turn off the thoughts that were spinning in his head like a broken record. The smell of cologne in the bedroom. Caleb's drawing is of a man without a face. Message. Is he really yours? He gripped the steering wheel, feeling his fingers tense. I had to stop thinking about it. It was necessary. His gaze caught on the car at the other end of the parking lot. A black sedan, expensive, with tinted windows. He didn't immediately understand why the car attracted his attention, but then he saw it Rachel. She sat in the passenger seat, her silhouette clear even in the twilight. She laughed, her head slightly tilted towards the driver. The man Marcus couldn't see his face, only his dark suit and broad shoulders. Rachel touched his arm, then leaned closer, and they hugged. Not quickly, not in a friendly way. It was slow, intimate, as if they were sharing something that Marcus wasn't supposed to see. He froze, feeling the blood pounding in his temples. My breathing became heavy, as if the air in the car had thickened. He stared, unable to look away, until Rachel pulled away, straightening her hair, a gesture he knew all too well. She opened the door and walked out, her heels clicking on the asphalt. The man remained in the car, his face still hidden in shadow. The sedan moved gently, drove out of the parking lot, and disappeared into the darkness. Marcus sat motionless. His hands were still gripping the steering wheel, his knuckles white. He saw her smile, her hand on the man's shoulder, her lightness the one that she had not shown at home for a long time. He wanted to go out, catch up with her, ask what it was, but his legs wouldn't obey. Instead, he watched her walk to her car, parked closer to the school. She didn't look back, didn't notice him. She just got behind the wheel and drove away. When Caleb appeared, Marcus barely heard the door knock. His son plopped down in the seat, throwing his backpack on the floor. "Why are you like this?" Caleb asked, looking at him. It was like seeing a ghost. Marcus forced himself to smile, but his lips did not obey. "Just thinking," he said, starting the car. "How was the training?" "Norm," Caleb muttered, looking at the phone. Marcus nodded, although he wasn't listening. His thoughts were on Rachel, a man in a black suit. Their hug. He drove in silence, the streets blurred before his eyes. Caleb didn't notice his tension or didn't want to notice. When they arrived home, the son immediately went upstairs, leaving Marcus alone in the silence of the kitchen. He poured water, but did not drink. Instead, he took out his phone and opened his correspondence with Rachel. Last message from her. "Take Caleb, please. I love you." He looked at the word love, and it seemed foreign, as if someone else had written it. He wanted to call her, ask her directly, but something stopped him. Fear, or unwillingness to know the truth. Rachel returned an hour later. He heard her car drive up and the door slam. She entered, throwing her bag on the sofa. Her hair was a little disheveled, but her face was flawless as always. "Hello," she said, smiling. "Thanks for taking Caleb." It was a crazy day. Marcus stood at the kitchen counter, holding a mug, although the coffee in it had long since cooled. He looked at her, trying to find something in her face, guilt, lies, anything. But she looked ordinary, too ordinary. "Where have you been?" he asked, and his voice sounded quieter than he intended. She froze, her smile wavered, but returned immediately. "Work," she said, taking off her blazer. "Meeting with the client. I told you so." "Meeting," he repeated, and the word hung in the air, heavy as a stone. "In the school parking lot?" Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't look away. "What?" She laughed, but it was forced. "What are you talking about, Marcus?" "I saw you," he said, and his voice became firmer. "In the car. With a man. You were hugging." Rachel fell silent, her fingers hovering over the button of her blouse. She looked at him, and something flashed in her gaze, irritation, or maybe fear. But then she straightened up, her face smoothed out. "It was a client," she said, her voice even almost cold. "I have work, Marcus. Don't forget who feeds us all." He felt the words cut like a knife. Not because they were true, he knew that her salary was higher. He knew that she carried the lion's share of their lives. But because she said it as if he were nobody, as if his work, his efforts, his existence meant nothing. "Customer," he said, putting the mug on the counter. "And you always hug your clients?" "Jesus, Marcus," she rolled her eyes, but her hand shook as she reached for a glass of wine. It was a gesture of politeness. He signed the contract. "Big contract. I have to be nice." "My dear," he repeated, and his voice was empty. He looked at her, trying to figure out if she was lying. Her eyes were hard, but there was something else in them, a shadow he couldn't make out. "Yes, dear," she said, taking a sip of wine. "This is my job. I build relationships. If you don't like it, say it straight." He wanted to say, he wanted to shout that he saw how she leaned towards that man, how her hand lingered on his shoulder, how her laughter was something he had not heard for years. But the words stuck. Instead, he asked, "Who is he?" Rachel sighed as if he was a child asking stupid questions. "His name is David. David Crow. He is from Technovista." New client. Are you satisfied? Satisfied, Marcus said, although it was a lie. He felt something inside him break, as if the thin thread that connected them began to break. It's just strange that you didn't mention it. Because it doesn't matter, she snapped, putting the glass on the table. I have dozens of meetings a week. I don't tell you about each one because you don't ask. And now you're asking because you saw something and decided. What? What am I changing? She looked at him, her eyes sharp, almost accusing. And Marcus felt guilty not for asking, but for doubting. But then he remembered the smell of cologne, Caleb's drawing, the message, and the doubt returned, cold and heavy. I didn't talk about treason, he said quietly. I just asked. But you thought it, she said, and her voice was softer, but there was steel in it. No need, Marcus. Don't start. She turned, took her bag, and went upstairs. Her steps were fast, confident, as if she had closed the topic once and for all. Marcus remained in the kitchen, looking at the empty glass she had left. The wine glistened at the bottom like blood. At night, he lay in the dark, listening to Rachel breathe next to him. She fell asleep quickly, or pretended to. He stared at the ceiling, replaying the scene in the parking lot in his head. A man in a black suit. David Crow. He tried to remember his face, but all he saw was a shadow, broad shoulders, the hand that Rachel had touched. He closed his eyes, but the image did not go away. He stood up, quietly so as not to wake her, and went downstairs. It was cold in the living room, the clock was ticking, as always. He sat down on the sofa and took out his phone. I opened the browser and typed, David Crow Technovista. The search returned several links, a corporate website, a LinkedIn profile, a couple of news items. He opened his profile. Photo, a man of about 40, dark hair, light gray hair at the temples, a smile that seemed too perfect. General Director of Technovista. Married, 2 children. Marcus looked at the photo, trying to figure out if it was the same person. But he wasn't sure. I didn't see a face in the car. Only a suit. Only her hand. He closed the phone, feeling his throat tighten. It was crazy. He shouldn't have checked. Shouldn't have doubted it. But the smell of cologne, Caleb's drawing, the message it all added up to a picture he didn't want to see. The morning was gray, like all the last days. Caleb left for school without saying a word, just throwing his backpack over his shoulder and muttering something about the test. Rachel drank coffee, scrolling through her tablet, her face calm, as if yesterday's conversation had not happened. Marcus looked at it, trying to find a crack, but it was impenetrable. Are you late today? He asked, just to break the silence. I don't know, she answered without looking up. Depends on the meeting. And you? An ordinary day, he said, although there was nothing ordinary in his life anymore. She nodded and smiled briefly, mechanically. Then she stood up and took her bag. See you in the evening, she said and left, leaving behind the smell of her perfume familiar, but now seemed foreign. Marcus was left alone. He took the mug, but the coffee was cold. He poured it into the sink, watching the dark liquid disappear. He thought about Caleb, about his drawing of a man without a face, and about Rachel, about her hand on another man's shoulder, and about himself, about how he stands in the middle of this house, this marriage, this life, and does not know who to believe. The silence in the house became palpable, like smoke. It filled the rooms, seeped into the cracks, and fell like a heavy burden on Marcus's shoulders. He sat in the living room, looking at the TV screen where some old movie was playing, but the sound was turned off. Rachel hadn't returned yet another client meeting, as she said this morning when she left. Caleb was upstairs, the door to his room closed as always. Marcus held an empty mug in his hands, not noticing that the coffee had long since run out. He felt its silence. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was alive, oppressive, as if the house was waiting for someone to scream. He got up and walked to the window. The street sparkled after the rain, the streetlights reflected in the puddles like eyes. He thought about the parking lot, about Rachel in that car, about her hand on the shoulder of the man in the black suit. David Crow. He repeated the name in his head until it sounded like a code, like a password to something he didn't want to know. Message, "Is he really yours?" was still on the phone, unread but unforgettable. And Caleb's drawing, a man without a face, stared back at him from memory like a ghost. Marcus knew he was doing something wrong, but he couldn't stop. In the morning, he went to an electronics store and chose a cheap hidden camera small, the size of a lighter, with Wi-Fi and a phone application. The salesman, a guy with an eyebrow piercing, prattled on about home protection and peace of mind, but Marcus barely listened. He felt dirty buying it, but he paid cash anyway without looking the cashier in the eyes. Now the box sat in his bag, hidden under his essay folders, like a bomb. He set up a camera in the bedroom while Rachel was at work and Caleb was at school. I put it on a shelf, among old books that no one had opened. The small lens looked at the bed, and Marcus hated himself for it. He didn't want to be that kind of person, the one who spies on his wife, who rummages through her life like a thief. But the smell of cologne, her smile in that car, the words, "It's just a client," all this haunted him. He turned on the application and checked the picture. Everything worked. He turned off the phone, feeling his throat tighten. In the evening, he tried to be a father. Caleb sat at the kitchen table, picking at the pizza Marcus had ordered to break up the day. Rachel wrote that she would be late. Documents, Marcus, nothing new. He didn't answer. Instead, he looked at Caleb, at his slumped shoulders, at the dark circles under his eyes. "How was school?" Marcus asked, cutting off a piece of pizza, although he didn't feel like eating. Caleb shrugged, without looking up. "Norm." "Norm," Marcus repeated, trying not to show his irritation. "You always say that. Maybe some details." Caleb sighed, as if the question was too much to bear. "Don't know. Lessons. Tests. Everything is as usual." Marcus nodded, feeling the silence return to fill the space between them. He wanted to say something else, to get a word out of his son, but instead he asked, "Do you want to go somewhere this weekend? Maybe to the lake. Go fishing like before." Caleb froze, his fingers tightening around his slice of pizza. "I don't know," he said finally. "I'm busy, I guess." "Busy," Marcus said, his voice softer than he expected. "How?" "Just business." Caleb stood up, throwing the half-eaten piece onto his plate. "Thanks for the pizza. I'll go to bed." "Caleb," Marcus called, but his son was already leaving, his footsteps echoing down the stairs. Marcus was left alone. He looked at the table, at the pizza box, at Caleb's empty plate. He wanted to be a good father. He wanted to be the one his son would come to with problems. But Caleb slipped away like a shadow, and Marcus didn't know how to catch him. At night, the silence became unbearable. He lay in the dark. Rachel had not returned yet. The bed was cold. The sheets smelled of laundry detergent, but he still smelled it, that alien cologne, even though he knew it was in his head. He closed his eyes, and suddenly he found himself there in the desert, under the scorching sun. The sand creaked under my boots, and the air smelled of smoke. His platoon moved forward, machine guns at the ready, but something was wrong. He knew this. He felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Then an explosion, sharp, deafening. Screams. Blood on the sand. He tried to run, but his legs were stuck as if in tar. He opened his eyes, gasping for breath. Sweat ran down his temples. His heart was pounding as if he was still there. He sat down, pressing his hands to his face. This wasn't the first flashback, but they hadn't come for years. Why now? He got up, walked to the window, and opened it. Cold air rushed into the room, but did not help. The silence at home was worse than the desert. There he knew the enemy, not here. He went down to the living room and turned on the light. The clock was ticking, its pendulum swinging like a metronome. He hated the watch, but Rachel loved it. He sat down on the sofa and took out his phone. Opened the camera application. The screen showed the bedroom empty, dark. He looked at the bed, at the pillows, at her side where she slept. Nothing. He turned off the app, feeling like an idiot. What did he want to see? Her with someone? Or proof that he's going crazy? The door slammed, and he flinched. Rachel walked in, her heels clicking on the floor. She looked tired but collected as always. Her blazer was slightly wrinkled, her hair a little disheveled. "Are you awake?" she asked, throwing her bag on the chair. It's already late. I couldn't sleep, he said, hiding the phone. How was the meeting? It's a long time, she answered, walking into the kitchen. He heard the refrigerator open and a bottle of wine clink. But productive. The contract is almost signed. Okay, he said, although he didn't care. He looked at her movements, at the way she avoided his gaze. Caleb went to bed early. Is he okay? She asked, but her voice was vague, as if she was asking out of politeness. I don't know, Marcus answered honestly. He doesn't speak. Rachel walked out of the kitchen holding her glass. She looked at him, her eyes dark, unreadable. He's a teenager, Marcus. They're all like that. Maybe, he said, but didn't believe it. He wanted to tell her about the drawing, about the man without a face, about Caleb slipping away. But instead he asked, Are you okay? She froze, her fingers gripping the glass a little tighter. Of course, she said, and her smile was too quick. I'm just tired. I'll go to bed. She went upstairs, leaving him alone. He heard the bedroom door creaking and the water running in the bathroom. He sat staring at the blank television screen, feeling the silence return as if Rachel had taken the last spark of life with her. He drove Caleb to school in the morning, trying to be a father again. He turned on the radio, some old rock station, hoping that music would fill the emptiness. Do you remember how we went to that concert? He asked, looking at the road. You were. How old? 10? Caleb nodded, not looking up from his phone. To him. It was fun, Marcus said, although the memory was as faint as an old photograph. Maybe we can go again. Maybe, Caleb muttered, and that was all. Marcus parked outside the school, watching his son leave without saying goodbye. He wanted to call out to him, but didn't. Instead, he drove to campus, feeling the silence follow him like a shadow. In the audience, he spoke about the Civil War, about division, about how families became enemies. The students listened with half an ear, but he didn't care. His voice was mechanical, his thoughts were somewhere else. He thought about the camera, about what it might record. He hated himself for it, but he couldn't stop. At lunchtime, he went into his office and closed the door. Opened the application. The bedroom was empty, as he expected. He played the recording nothing, just a dark room, just the ticking of a clock. He turned off the phone, feeling his throat tighten. It was crazy. He knew it. But the smell of cologne, the man in the black suit, the drawing of Caleb, it was all real. Or not. At night, the flashback returned. He was in a convoy, night, stars over the desert. Silence is the same as at home. Then the light, blinding, and the sound, tearing the ears. He screamed, but no one heard. He woke up gasping for breath, Rachel sleeping next to him, her breathing as steady as a metronome. He got up, went into the bathroom, and splashed water on his face. His reflection in the mirror looked alien, his eyes were red, his cheeks were sunken. He didn't recognize himself. He returned to the bedroom, but did not lie down. Instead, he opened his phone and checked the camera. Nothing, only emptiness. He stared at the screen, feeling the silence of the house pressing on him, as if he were alone in a platoon surrounded by enemies who could not be seen. Saturday began with silence, but a different one, not at home, but outside, the kind that comes when the rain finally stops and the world freezes, as if deciding what to do next. Marcus stood at the window in the living room, holding a mug of cold coffee, and watched as his neighbor Sarah watered the flowers on her lawn. Her movements were slow, almost ritualistic, as if she was talking to each plant. Sarah had been in Willow Creek longer than they had 10 years, maybe more. Lonely, without a husband, without children, with a sharp gaze and a habit of noticing everything that happened around. Marcus never really talked to her, but Rachel always winced when her name was mentioned. Gossip girl, she said, and Marcus didn't argue. Until today. He noticed her glance when he went out to get the mail. Sarah stood by the fence, holding the garden shears, looking at him as if she were waiting. He nodded, expecting the usual good morning, but she didn't smile. Marcus, she said, her voice low and slightly hoarse. Do you have a minute? He froze, feeling something in her tone catch him like a hook. Of course, he replied, coming closer. Did something happen? Sarah put the scissors down and wiped her hands on her apron. Her eyes, gray and tenacious, looked straight at him, as if they saw something that he himself did not notice. I'm not one to meddle in other people's business, she began, although Marcus immediately realized that this was a lie. But you are a good person, and I see things. Things? He frowned, feeling his palms getting colder. What things? She stepped closer to the fence. Her voice became quieter, but did not lose its firmness. Rachel, she is not who she pretends to be. You don't see it, but she wrote you off a long time ago. The words hit me like a slap in the face. Marcus opened his mouth to protest, but said nothing. He looked at Sarah, at her face, wrinkled but not angry, and felt something shrinking inside. The smell of cologne, the man in the black suit, Caleb's drawing, the message, all of this flashed in his head like warning lights. What do you mean? He asked finally, and his voice was hoarse, as if he hadn't spoken for hours. Sarah sighed, her gaze softening but not losing its edge. I see her leave. He returns late. Sometimes her car is parked outside the house when you're at work, but she's not alone. I'm not blind, Marcus, and not deaf. He felt the ground disappear from under his feet. He wanted to say that she was wrong, that Rachel was just working, that these were all her clients, contracts, her life. But Sarah's words were too accurate, too close to what he himself suspected. Are you sure? He asked, and immediately regretted it. He didn't want to know, or did you want to? Sarah shrugged, but her eyes never left his. I'm not following her, if that's what you mean. But I live here. I see who comes and who goes. And I know when a woman looks at a man the way she looks at you, or he doesn't look. Marcus clenched his fists, feeling his nails dig into his palms. He didn't know what to say. I didn't know whether to believe her or not. Sarah could just be a gossip, as Rachel said. But something in her words and their cold, calm confidence did not allow her to brush it off. Thank you, he said finally, although it was ridiculous. What to be grateful for? Because she stuck a knife into his already shaky world? Sarah nodded, picked up the scissors, and went back to her flowers as if nothing had happened. Marcus walked towards the house, feeling her words settle in his chest like sand. The house was empty. Rachel left in the morning, meeting with colleagues, as she said, kissing him on the cheek. Her lips were cold and her smile was too fast. Caleb was still sleeping or pretending to be asleep. Marcus sat on the sofa, looking at the TV, which no one turned on. He thought about the camera in the bedroom, how it showed nothing. Nothing yet. He hated himself for checking the notes, but he couldn't stop. Sarah's words only added fuel to the fire. He got up, went into the kitchen, and poured water. The glass shook in his hand, and he realized that he had not eaten since the morning. But I didn't want to eat. He thought about Rachel, about the way she laughed in that car, about her hand on David Crow's shoulder, and about Sarah, about her words. She wrote you off a long time ago. He hated that word, wrote off, as if he were a thing that could be thrown away when it wore out. He heard footsteps upstairs. Caleb came down in a sweatshirt with disheveled hair. He walked to the refrigerator and took out the juice without looking at Marcus. Good morning, Marcus said, trying to sound light. Uh-huh, Caleb muttered, pouring the juice. Plans for the day? Marcus asked, although he knew there would be no answer. I don't know, Caleb said, putting the bottle back down. Homework, probably. Marcus nodded, feeling the silence return as if Caleb had brought it with him. He wanted to ask about the drawing, about the man without a face, but instead he said, If you want, we can watch a movie in the evening, just like before. Caleb looked at him, and there was something in his eyes, not irritation, but something deeper, as if he wanted to say something, but couldn't. Maybe, he finally said, and went upstairs, leaving Marcus alone. The day dragged on as slowly as molasses. Rachel returned for lunch, with supermarket bags and a smile that seemed too bright. She talked about work, about some new project, but Marcus barely listened. He looked at her hands, at the way she straightened her hair, and thought about Sarah, about her words, about the car that was parked outside the house when he was away. "Are you okay?" Rachel asked as she put the plates in the dishwasher. "You're kind of quiet." "Just wondering," he said, and it was true. He thought about her, about Caleb, about himself, about how everything he knew was collapsing like a house of cards. About what? She looked at him, her eyes were attentive, but there was a wall in them. He knew that look. She used it when she didn't want him to dig deeper. "About us," he said, and his voice was quieter than he expected. "About Caleb, about what's happening." She froze, her hand stopping on the dishwasher door. "Nothing is happening, Marcus," she said, her voice as hard as glass. "We're fine. Caleb is fine. You're just thinking too much." He wanted to object, to tell her about Sarah, about the camera, about his doubts. But instead he nodded, feeling Sarah's words burning him from the inside. "She wrote you off a long time ago." Night came like a thief. Marcus lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling while Rachel slept or pretended to sleep beside him. He couldn't sleep. For the first time in years, he felt like sleep was a luxury he didn't deserve. His mind was full of voices: Sarah, Rachel, Caleb, his own. And that message he couldn't forget: "Is he really yours?" He stood up, quietly, so as not to wake her, and went down to the living room. The clock ticked, its sound was the only thing that broke the silence. He sat down on the sofa and took out his phone. Opened the camera application. The bedroom was dark and empty. He looked at the screen, feeling his heart pounding. Nothing. But Sarah's words haunted me. "Sometimes her car is parked outside the house, but she's not alone." He closed the application, but did not turn off the phone. Instead, he opened his browser and typed in Rachel's name. Nothing new: her LinkedIn profile, a couple of old articles about her work. Then he typed David Crow. Same photo, same smile. He looked at him, trying to remember if he had seen this man before. But all he saw was the shadow in the car, the black suit, her hand. He put the phone down, feeling his throat tighten. He didn't sleep. I couldn't. The silence of the house was too loud, too heavy. He thought about Sarah, about what she knew, about Rachel, about what she was hiding, and about Caleb, about his silence, which was louder than any words. He sat in the dark until the sky outside the window began to brighten. For the first time in years, he greeted the morning without closing his eyes, and I knew that this was just the beginning. Marcus woke up earlier than usual, although he had not slept fully all night. There was a coldness in my chest, as if a February draft had entered the house, although outside the windows the dull grayness of late autumn reigned. He still didn't know what exactly woke him up, but he felt that something had changed forever. The silence that hung over their family life for many weeks seemed deafening. He stood up, trying not to break the floorboards, and left the bedroom. Rachel lay on her side of the bed, facing the wall, as if putting an invisible barrier between herself and her husband. Marcus knew that she would wake up at the slightest noise, but now she didn't even move. Her breathing remained even, as if she were somewhere far away in a world where she had no secrets, no worries, no questions that could destroy a marriage. Marcus went down to the living room. The parquet floor creaked slightly underfoot. On the wall, a heavy bronze clock was ticking, looking like a relic from the century before last, the same gift from Rachel's mother, whom he had never loved. The clock beat the seconds, like a hammer hitting an anvil, and this sound once again emphasized his internal tension. It was no longer possible to live pretending that everything was fine. Doubts that had been accumulating for months sprouted in the mind like weeds, choking the remnants of trust. And yet he hoped that the main thing was only his personal paranoia and not real deception. That Rachel was simply tired and lost her way, rather than betraying him at the deepest point of their relationship. But fate has already lifted the curtain. He went into the kitchen and put on the kettle, although he knew that he could not drink a single sip. Through the window, I saw the thin gray light of dawn stretch across the backyard. This pre-dawn moment always seemed to him a symbol of something new, a chance for correction. But today, the novelty has acquired the taste of rusty iron. He no longer wanted to look for any answers. Rather, he felt fear of the truth being revealed. The mug grew cold in his hands when he heard footsteps. Looking back, Marcus saw Caleb, sleepy, in pajama pants, with hair sticking out in all directions. My heart sank. My son grew up, stretched out, and became a stranger. His gaze remained distant, and this alienation cut Marcus more than any physical pain. "You're up so early," Caleb muttered, looking at his father with misty eyes. "Did something happen?" Marcus shook his head. "No, I just woke up. Have you had nightmares?" Caleb shrugged. He was clearly about to say something else, but then light footsteps were heard on the stairs. Rachel walked downstairs, her posture straight, her hair impeccably tied up. It seemed that she had already taken a shower and put on her makeup, although it was barely 6 in the morning. Her gaze slid over Marcus, over her son, and lingered on him only for a split second, just long enough to make it clear that she did not experience any tender feelings at this moment. "Good morning, everyone," she said, as if indifferently. "Anyone want breakfast?" Marcus remained silent. Caleb just shook his head and muttered that he needed to get ready for school. Rachel walked into the kitchen and made herself some coffee silently, and Marcus remained in the living room, watching as she brushed her dark hair out of her face in a perfectly practiced motion that mimicked a smile for the public. "She is an actress," he thought, "and I also played a role, the role of a loving but distant husband, the role of a father who does not notice his own family." He looked at his wife and son, feeling that something irreparable would happen today. He could only wait for the truth to be revealed and hope that he would not break completely. The day that turned everything upside down turned out to be unusually cold for their quiet suburb. Autumn rain was drizzling, the wind beat on the windows, and the sky, painted in heavy leaden tones, seemed to hang over the houses. Marcus returned home early. The university canceled a couple of lectures due to electrical problems. He entered the house and immediately felt the tension in the air. It was as if the walls were saturated with someone else's breath. Rachel wasn't there. The note on the refrigerator read, "Meeting with client's lawyer. I'll be there soon." The word lawyer struck a nerve. However, her work in the field of PR and marketing did often bring her to lawyers, notaries, and other representatives of the corporate world. But intuition suggested that behind this phrase there was something more. Taking off his rain-soaked jacket, Marcus walked into Rachel's office. It was a tiny work area with a white desk, neatly stacked files, and a laptop. On normal days, she would not allow him to even touch his work files for reasons of secrecy and client confidentiality. But now something pushed him to turn on her laptop. Perhaps it was that very drop of mistrust that had been wandering in his head for a long time. Or I remembered the words of my neighbor Sarah, who saw someone else's car in the house. Or the smell of cologne, an unfamiliar smell that Marcus smelled in their bedroom. He sighed and pressed the power button. The screen lit up and asked for a password. His heart was pounding, and Marcus almost turned back, intending to close the lid and leave. But the fingers themselves typed one of the options, Caleb's birthday, and it worked the first time. Is it really that simple? He thought. But the next thing he saw made his heart skip a beat. On your desktop, there is a folder called Jason_new_contract. There were several files inside, but one name caught my eye, chatlog HTML. Marcus double-clicked, and the browser opened a long conversation. At first, it seemed that we were talking about business negotiations. Jason asked about deadlines and legal subtleties. Rachel answered briefly and clarified the details. But the further the correspondence went, the less formal there was, and more personal, too personal. Jason 2314, I can't stop thinking about last night. Your dress drove me crazy. Rachel 2315, you seem to take it off quickly, so I'm not sure if you remember its color. Marcus felt his palms becoming sticky with sweat. Could he have been mistaken in his interpretation of these words? Hardly. It was impossible to read them otherwise. He scrolled further, skipping harsh phrases filled with play, flirting, and desperate passion. But the greatest shock lay ahead. In the correspondence, a whole album with photos and videos surfaced. Attached files that had eloquent names. Meet me in the office mauve. We underscore and underscore the underscore car.jpg. The photos loaded slowly, as luck would have it, and Marcus was burning inside. He didn't know if he had the strength to face what would in any case be a betrayal. He saw Rachel in the car. Obviously, in the evening, her hair was disheveled. Sitting next to him was a young man in an expensive suit, 10 years younger than Marcus. He hugged her tightly by the shoulders, pressing his face to her neck. Rachel laughed, her eyes shining like those of a girl who had received a long-awaited gift. "Damn," Marcus blurted out. The voice trembled. Continuing the correspondence hit my nerves even harder. There she complained about the coldness of her husband, that he doesn't feel like I'm slipping away. In one of the messages, Jason suggested that she leave Marcus and move in with him. She replied that she was afraid to rock the boat, but if anything happens, I'll just leave, he won't even notice. He's too broken, a veteran with his head in the clouds. Every word hit like a nail in the heart. Marcus closed his laptop. My head was buzzing, the blood was pounding in my temples. He didn't know what to do, where to look, how to live further. But suddenly his attention was drawn to a photo on the wall, a family photo of him and Caleb, taken back in elementary school. All three are smiling. It seems that at that moment they were sincerely happy. Marcus thought, where are those smiles now? He grabbed the car keys and ran out into the rain, unable to stay in the house. It was impossible to stay within four walls saturated with lies. For several days, Marcus tried not to cross paths with Rachel, throwing himself into work, taking extra hours, helping students prepare for exams, wandering around campus like a ghost. Every meeting with his wife threatened to explode, so he avoided her, and she didn't seem to be trying very hard to talk. Caleb became more and more withdrawn into himself. The teenager had not been verbose before, but now it seemed as if he had locked himself in some kind of shell. Marcus saw his son glance briefly in his direction, as if trying to say something, but fear or resentment was holding back the words. One evening something happened that should have put everything in its place, although at first glance it seemed like a simple accident. Marcus returned home after hearing a strange noise in the kitchen. He walked in and saw Caleb sitting on the floor, huddled, clutching his throat. His face was glowing with red spots. His breathing was interrupted by heavy wheezing. "Son." Marcus rushed towards him, panic flashing in his eyes. "What's happened? What did you eat?" Caleb couldn't speak. His hands, trembling, clutched his jacket on his chest, and on the table lay an open package of peanut cookies. Marcus didn't remember how exactly he reacted. It was as if automatic rescue mode had turned on. He grabbed his son, picked him up, and led him to the car, at the same time calling an ambulance. My heart was pounding at a breakneck speed. Fear for my son overcame all doubts, resentments, and pain. The hospital processed them quickly. The nurse explained that Caleb had a severe allergic reaction to peanuts' anaphylactic shock. While the doctors were setting up enrollment for and administering medications, Marcus grabbed one of them by the sleeve. "In our family, he corrected himself, have a peanut allergy. I thought it was transmitted, but he never showed any signs." The doctor frowned, checking something in the documents. "You say you have allergies? However, tests for allergen markers in my son show a slightly different picture. You understand that not only the form of allergy is inherited, but also certain genetic markers. In Caleb's case, I'm afraid he didn't inherit your predisposition, he showed his own. But the gene profiles do not match so much that." "What?" Marcus almost did not understand the meaning of the words. The doctor pursed his lips. He glanced briefly at Rachel standing in the hallway. She had just rushed from the office, looking disheveled and scared, but more worried about the possible social consequences than about her son. Then the doctor leaned over and said very quietly, "It might be worth taking a paternity test to rule out all the questions. I don't want to pry into your personal life, but the gene profile. It does not indicate your relationship, at least not unambiguously." Marcus felt the floor beneath his feet turn into a quagmire. He looked at his son, who was lying under enrollment 4. He wanted to believe that this was all a mistake, A coincidence? Nonsense. But the recent discovery in the laptop, the correspondence with Jason, all this now looked like part of a monstrous puzzle. The doctor's words were low, almost a whisper, so Rachel wouldn't hear. But she stood about 10 meters away, looking at them, and she looked not so alarmed as worried about exactly what the doctor was discussing with Marcus. He felt rage flare up in his chest and could hardly restrain himself from bursting out right there in the hospital corridor. The next morning, Marcus got up with a heavy heart. There was almost no sleep. He was haunted by nightmares in which he wandered through deserted corridors looking for his son, but every time he found empty rooms. Waking up in a cold sweat, he automatically felt the bed next to him. Rachel was lying there, breathing evenly, as if everything was normal. He almost screamed from powerlessness. Caleb was already feeling better. He was sent home with instructions to avoid peanuts and carry an epinephrine auto-injector with him in case of relapse. The anti-allergy medications made him drowsy, so he slept almost all the time. Rachel surrounded her son with care, but this care looked feigned, like just another role for an outside observer. Marcus sees how scared she is when Caleb looks at him more than at her, and recently the son trusted his mother more. When the moment came, Marcus quietly, carefully, but firmly made a decision. He went to a private laboratory and submitted samples for a DNA test. The procedure did not take much time. The whole process went quietly, as if in some kind of half asleep. It was as if he was haunted by a ghost. What if confirmation came? What if the child is not his? Or, conversely, what if this is just an absurd coincidence, and he is in vain denigrating his wife in his thoughts? The days of waiting for results turned into excruciating torture. Marcus froze in a kind of cold stupor. He did not speak to Rachel, tried to avoid her glances, and she, it seemed, only pretended not to notice anything. Her laughter sounded false, her words were an empty echo, and every joint breakfast turned into a theatrical production in which the roles had been assigned long ago and forever. One day at breakfast, after Caleb had already left for school, Rachel tried to make small talk by talking about her plans for the weekend. "Marcus, could we go out of town and rent a house by the lake? Do you remember how much you liked to fish? The weather isn't the best, but a change of scenery would be good for everyone." He just took a sip of his coffee and silently shrugged. His eyes remained empty, his voice cold. "Can you hear me?" she asked, looking defiantly into his face. "I hear," he answered with a heavy sigh. "I don't see the point in talking." "What's happening to you?" she hissed, barely containing her irritation. Her perfect posture, manicure, smooth face with expensive cosmetics, all of this suddenly seemed like a mask to him. How often does she wear this mask when she's dating Jason? He didn't answer. He got up and left the table, leaving behind his unfinished mug. The door slammed, and silence reigned in the house again, a silence that screamed that something was broken irrevocably. The test results came in a week. Marcus received an email notification that the report was available for download. He sat in a car near campus, rain running down the windshield, a stack of student essays lying on the next seat. His hands were shaking when he opened the letter and clicked on the link. And there, in black and white, probability of paternity, 0.0%. He closed his eyes, feeling like everything inside was being torn apart. The doctor's words about genetic markers now rang louder than bells. Silent evidence in the form of correspondence, photographs, videos, they all merged together, making the picture indisputable. Rachel cheated on him. And apparently, many years ago, she gave birth to a child not from him. Sitting behind the wheel, Marcus looked at the screen for a long time. His heart beat loudly, as if he could hear it beating in his ears. It was as if he suddenly found himself in a combat situation, but the enemy was the whole world. He looked up at the glass. The silhouette of a college town was barely visible behind the rain veil. Everything that seemed to him a reliable rear after the army suddenly became meaningless. I started the car and drove out of the parking lot. Instead of heading home, he drove past his quiet neighborhood. "I can't get in there now," he thought. "I can't look my son in the eyes. Someone else's son. I can't look at Rachel, who betrayed me." He drove until dusk fell outside the window, stayed at a cheap roadside motel. The room was tiny, with smoky curtains and cheap furniture, but that didn't matter to him. The main thing is not to see their home, their happy, as it once seemed, family abode. At night, he did not turn off the light, sat on a hard bed and looked into emptiness, feeling how every breath came with difficulty. It was as if a draft passed through his chest, blowing away his emotions, turning him into an ice statue. In the morning, Marcus returned home. He entered so quietly that no one noticed his appearance. The kitchen was in disarray. Pots, plates, traces of yesterday's dinner, some candy wrappers on the table. Apparently, Rachel didn't bother to clean up. It suddenly seemed to him that this was chaos, reflecting their family life. Everything was scattered, mixed up, dirty, and no one was in a hurry to put it in order. Caleb sat in the living room, staring at his tablet. Hearing footsteps, he turned his head and looked at his father. For a moment, the teenager's eyes widened, as if he sensed the cold indifference that came from Marcus. "Hi," Caleb said quietly. "You didn't spend the night at home last night?" "I was away for work," Marcus said, not wanting to go into details. The son nodded, but resentment flashed in his gaze. Or maybe anxiety. Over the past few months, Caleb had seen his father and mother grow apart too often, and he had grown distant from them himself. Now there was a wall between them, which Marcus himself erected, although deep down he understood. The boy was not to blame for this betrayal. But anger, pain, bitterness, everything accumulated in Marcus, like a black hole that absorbed any warm feelings. Dishes rattled in the kitchen as Rachel returned, setting out the breakfast plates, trying to create the appearance of a normal family. Marcus walked in and looked at her. She dressed in a strict blouse, light makeup on her face, the perfect picture of a businesswoman who is always in control of everything. He suddenly realized that he hated this facial expression, this emphasized neatness. "Oh, are you here?" She was surprised, as if she really didn't expect to see her husband. "I called you, wrote messages. You didn't answer." "I've been busy," he replied curtly. "I'm making breakfast." He definitely moved it away from the stove, took out eggs and butter, and began the usual task. Once upon a time, even before the war, he loved to cook. They said he could make the best omelets in the world. But now it was more of a mechanical action. Throw an egg into a frying pan, add salt, and fry it a little. Rachel sat down at the table, watching him sideways. He felt her gaze, but pretended not to notice. Caleb came in and sat down opposite his mother, looking at them both. The situation was absurd. It seemed that everyone was waiting for something, but no one dared to speak. "It smells delicious," Caleb said carefully. "Thank you, Dad." The word "dad" struck Marcus as a pain in his chest. "I'm not your dad," he thought, trying to keep his cool. At least not by blood. And then his heart sank. After all, it was this boy who called him Dad since he learned to speak. It was for his sake that he returned from the war, trying to move on with his life. And now, could he, in a matter of minutes, erase all those years when he considered Caleb his own? But determination, cold rage towards Rachel, towards her lies, outweighed. When he turned around, there was a mask of complete indifference on his face. "Will you have it with or without cheese?" Marcus asked, addressing the void rather than his son. Caleb shrugged. "Without. I can't have anything extra now, in case there's some kind of peanut butter mixed in there." He tried to joke, but his voice sounded muffled. Marcus nodded, turning the omelet over and placing the plate in front of his son. Then he took out another frying pan and prepared a portion for himself. Rachel watched him deftly beat the eggs, looking at this picture with some confusion. Finally, she couldn't stand it anymore. "Darling, can you at least answer where you were? I was worried. I thought you had problems." "There really are problems," he responded, looking at the omelet spatula. "But they are not where I spent the night." "Then what?" He remained silent, as if he had not heard the question. When the omelet was browned, he put it on a plate and sat down at the table, crossing his arms over his chest. He looked first at his wife, then at his son, and everything was seething inside him. That evening, Marcus finally made up his mind. He returned home with the files he saved from Rachel's laptop. I took paper printouts of correspondence, photos, and the laboratory's conclusion about DNA. I have attached recordings from the camera that I installed in the bedroom. All this lay in a brown folder, heavy as evidence in court. Rachel returned late, smelled of someone else's perfume, looked tiredly at her husband, and saw a folder on the table. Her heart skipped a beat. This was noticeable by the way she sharply reached for her hair, trying to pull herself together with a familiar gesture. "What is this?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "See for yourself," Marcus said, looking her straight in the eyes. She opened the folder. The first thing I saw were several photographs, her own face, laughing in a car, next to a young man. Next are screenshots of correspondence with Jason, where she wrote about her dull husband and that he doesn't feel like he's lost me for a long time. Then the results of the DNA test, recorded on several pages, with the note 0.00%. Rachel looked at these papers with a pale face, her lips trembled, but she tried to pull herself together. It, it's not what it seems, she began, trying to find convincing words. Jason is my colleague, a lawyer, I just flirted. And what? It doesn't mean anything. Marcus closed his eyes, trying to control himself. He imagined how just yesterday he could have pulled out her hair, how he could have smashed something heavy against the wall out of rage. But only icy calm remained in him, as if everything had already been lost, and there was no point in going on a rampage. "Does this mean nothing?" he asked again. "Fine. What will the DNA test show? By chance? A laboratory error?" She opened her mouth to say something, but the words stuck. Finally, she squeezed out, "Oh my God, Marcus, does it matter who his father is by blood? He still calls you Dad. You raised him, you." "I raised him without knowing that you lied to me from the very beginning," he growled, his fists clenching. "You let me think that this was my son. Now you want to tell me that it doesn't mean anything." "He loves you," Rachel said, almost whispering. "You are a real father to him." "Is it possible to cross out everything like that?" "No, now I want to cross you out," Marcus said unexpectedly evenly. "You and your lies. The very thought of living next to a traitor for so many years is disgusting to me. That you made me believe in a family that didn't exist." She wanted to shout that it was unfair, that everything was not so simple. But Marcus silently pointed to the printouts, then to the TV, where the video from the camera could be played. He didn't show her the video itself. He knew that seeing her intimate scenes there with an unfamiliar man or the same Jason would only make him more furious. But everything is already clear. She took a step towards him, her voice trembling. "Look, yes, I made a mistake, but we can fix everything if you had not withdrawn into yourself after the army, if you had been closer to me. Don't you dare blame me." His eyes flashed with anger. "Don't you dare say that I'm to blame for your betrayals. If I became isolated, it was because of the war, because I killed people and defended the country. And at this time you just found solace in a strange man." She made an unhappy face, but he saw that this was just another theatrical mask, trying to play the victim to confuse him. But now he couldn't be fooled. Footsteps were heard from the corridor. Caleb, pale, in pajamas, stood and looked at his parents. In the eyes of a teenager, there is fear, anxiety, bewilderment. He saw these papers on the table, saw his mother and father standing opposite each other, as if in a ring. "What's happening?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Dad, Mom," you screamed. "Go to your room," Marcus said, not turning to his son. "It's between us." "But Caleb began, and then Rachel also intervened. "Go," she repeated, trying to hold back tears. The son stood for a while, then turned around and wandered upstairs, hunched over, as if a roller skating rink had passed over him. Marcus looked after him, and everything turned upside down in his soul. It's not his fault. It's not his fault, he thought, but alienation overpowered compassion. When Caleb disappeared, Marcus turned to Rachel. "I'm leaving." "Where?" "I'll file for divorce. And believe me, A DNA test is not an empty formality. I will make you answer in court for this lie. She sat down on the sofa, covering her face with her hands. The sobs sounded loud, as if she had lost everything in the world. But Marcus felt neither sympathy nor compassion for her. Only cold and pain intertwined with hatred. Several weeks passed, filled with legal formalities and paperwork. Marcus hired a lawyer, a friend from the law department, who quickly prepared a divorce suit, citing the fact of infidelity and concealing the true paternity of the child. The words and formulations sounded dry, legal, like long-range shots. The court hearings took place in the district hall, which was small but inspired an atmosphere of seriousness. There were people sitting on the brown benches, waiting their turn, and another couple was already standing at the barrier, ending their marriage due to irreconcilable differences. Marcus listened to other people's stories, but did not delve into it. His own drama was much deeper, more painful. When it was their turn, the judge, a stern, middle-aged woman, called the parties to the microphone. Marcus stood up, holding a folder of documents. Rachel also stood up. She looked exhausted, but her face still retained a well-honed coldness that in other situations would have been suitable for business negotiations. Marcus' lawyer spoke first. He read the arguments in a firm, confident voice. My client wants a divorce because the plaintiff deliberately misled him regarding the paternity of the child. Here is the evidence. Test results confirming that the probability of paternity is 0%. In addition, there is correspondence that indicates adultery on the part of the plaintiff. The judge listened, leafing through the papers. Her face remained professionally calm, but her eyebrows raised slightly at the words 0.0%. Next, the floor was passed to Rachel's lawyer, a tall man with neat glasses. He tried to put forward the arguments that the upbringing of a child matters, that the family should be preserved for his sake, that sometimes misunderstandings arise in marriage, but they can be resolved. However, all his phrases sounded faded, especially against the backdrop of the irrefutable results of the paternity test. Then Rachel stepped forward and addressed the judge in a trembling voice. I'm sorry. I would like to say that these tests do not change anything. My son still calls Marcus Dad. He grew up with him. He is the only father figure he knows. I admit my mistakes. I admit that I cheated on my husband, but all this is in the past. I love Marcus despite everything that happened. Her eyes sparkled with tears and her voice trembled as if she really felt remorse. The judge looked at her, then at Marcus. Mr. Davis, are you ready for any compromise? Your spouse claims that the child is important to you, despite the lack of blood ties. It may be appropriate to discuss joint custody. There was silence in the hall. Rachel looked at Marcus, her eyes pleading for him to somehow give in to his emotions. In the back row sat Caleb, pale, with clenched fists. The lawyers took him there to avoid the teenager's direct participation in sorting out all the dirty details. But the judge still asked to bring him in so that he could understand the essence of the process. Marcus walked up to the microphone, feeling a cold flame burning everything inside him. His voice did not tremble. It sounded evenly and harshly. I refuse any compromise, Your Honor. This child is not mine. The entire marriage was based on lies and betrayal. I won't drag this out any further. Let them live with what they did. A dull whisper passed through the hall. The judge exchanged glances with the secretary. Behind her, Rachel screamed, covering her face with her hands, as if her words about love had crumbled into dust. The lawyer tried to object, but Marcus stood there like a mountain. Do you confirm that you are waiving any rights in relation to this child? The judge asked again, wanting to finally record the words for the record. I confirm, he said quietly, but with clear determination. Caleb's trembling voice came from the back rows. Dad, don't go. Marcus clenched his teeth, feeling the words cut him inside. But he didn't turn around. I'm not a dad. Not for you. No more, he repeated to himself. He heard the judge go through the formalities of calling a break. How Rachel sobs, how her lawyer begins to persuade her to do something. but Marcus turned and walked steadily towards the exit, not looking back while that last "Dad" rang in his ears. After the trial, Marcus moved away from Willow Creek. He could no longer look at familiar streets, see neighbors who seemed to know everything. The city became for him an abandoned battlefield where every house, every corner was reminded of lies and betrayal. He rented a house on the outskirts of a small industrial town, about 3 hours' drive from his previous place. The house was old, with peeling paint, but Marcus felt that it would be easier for him to breathe here. Around no one knows his name, has not seen his family, has not asked why the previous light disappeared from his eyes. The move went quickly. He collected his things, leaving almost all the jointly acquired property to his wife and her son. In just one day, he transported a small load in a pickup truck. The uniform he served in, books on military history, old army junk that was considered souvenirs, and also family photos, but not to save, but to destroy. On the first night in a new place, he lit a fireplace. The curtains smelled musty, but he didn't think much of it. The main thing was warmth and also a feeling of freedom, bitter and burning. When the fire got hot, he took out an old album. The sheets have turned yellow and cracks have already appeared in some frames. The first photo, he is holding tiny Caleb, who is not even a year old, smiling as sincerely as he seems to have not smiled in the last 10 years. Then photos from school holidays, family picnics, happy faces everywhere. Lie shouted an inner voice. It's all a lie. Marcus threw the photographs into the fire, watched as the flames engulfed the smiling images. It was as if the same fire was burning inside him, burning out the memories. Some parts still resisted, shouted, but he loved them. He loved this boy like a son. But a cold mind ordered, you saw how she betrayed, how she lied all this time. There's no turning back. When the last photograph curled into a black, charred film, Marcus felt that he had burned everything that connected him with the past. But along with liberation came emptiness, and then he took out an old record player, which he took with him on the road. He turned on the record a melody that sounded in his youth, when he had just returned from the army and was full of hope. The music filled the room with booming, vintage notes. The melody was slightly distorted by time and the quality of the equipment, but it had something alive. Marcus leaned back on the old sofa and closed his eyes. There are hundreds of voices in his head, Caleb calling him Dad, Rachel whispering, he won't feel it if I leave, sounds of battle from long-ago memories, explosions, screams, flashbacks that he suffered after returning. At that moment, he realized that he had cut himself off not only from Rachel's lies, but also from the life he had tried to build after the war. He became a soldier in a foreign land, a man with nowhere to go but forward alone. The music reached its climax, and with it, something in Marcus's chest broke and dispersed in waves of despair. But he didn't cry or moan. He just clenched his teeth until moisture appeared in his eyes. At the end of the melody, he pressed his palms to his face and whispered, I'm sorry. Not knowing who exactly these words were addressed to himself, the son he abandoned, or the old version of himself who believed in family and love. The war is not over, he realized. She just took on other forms. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.